this week's reading. Now, next week, it says you're responsible to read chapters 12 to 13 or 12 to 15 or something like that. But the blank week, this week, obviously, if you looked at the syllabus, you should have seen that chapters 9, 10, and 11 were missing. So if you didn't get a chance to read 9, 10, and 11 this week, please go ahead, watch the PowerPoint, and then read chapters 9, 10, 11 too this week. That was an error that I made. So I wanted to address that right away. Number 2, you should have gotten back your peer reviews from a fellow student. Now, unfortunately, I did not get everybody's participation in the peer review process. I don't know if that was just too jarring, or perhaps I didn't explain it well enough. I will try to do better with the explanations in the future. However, if you have not yet sent in a peer review, please reach out to me as soon as you can, so that we can facilitate some version of that. I can't give you full points at this juncture because we had it due Thursday, and I even had some late submissions Friday, and now we're talking into Monday morning of the next week. So it's pretty late at this point, but it still can be a valuable exercise. So don't let those easy points go. Contact me, and we'll see what we can do. Now, moving on to today's lecture material. First up is the self-assessment sample graph. Now, we've looked at this before, and one of the things that's interesting about the self-assessment sample graph is that we went ahead and read through this together. And this is the self-assessment peer review. Again, it's on the piece that we just read, Growth Through Writing. And I've, again, tried to create some anonymity for that particular student. And I've replaced his name with sample author. And though the response here is in red text, I asked you to complete the assessment with bold. So that's a minor difference. But I had students identify the key strengths that the author had indicated, naming at least one important strength, and they were writing proficient. The author is clear on his intentions in the class, and he makes his point easy for the reader to understand. Is that true? Yes. Being able to come out of this class with skills for the real world is critical. What, if any, concerns would the author have? He noted that writing is not his favorite thing, or even his strongest skill set. Was there an effective hook that brought you in? And as I said here, no, not really. He just sort of jumps into the essay as in medias res, or in the middle of things. And so I asked my peer reviewer, is this something worth adding to the final edition of the graph? Does the essay's format adhere to the assignment description? Are there multiple body paragraphs? Does the author use transitions effectively? And here, yeah, there are multiple body paragraphs and a clear intro and conclusion. High praise for that writer. I must say your work is seldom confusing or difficult to follow. Is there a clear thesis? Yes. And I recreated the thesis here. I hope to gain a new perspective and have improved my basic writing in all areas touched upon, so I may continue to use them. And I say this thesis was clear and precise. So this is where we're at in the revision stage. So the next step, of course, would be to take the commentary that I provided, focusing on grammar mechanics, the kind of, you know, nails and essential pieces. Nails and pieces? What am I trying to, what analogy am I trying to make here? Anyway, all the pins and buttons, things that we need to make that work. And then use the materials that your peer review author provided in terms of a response, and then apply that to a peer review assessment. So a final draft. Now the final draft is going to be due on the 26th. So that's a Friday. So you have all week to prepare your final draft. In reference to the last time I checked, I believe the peer final drafts that I received, I think there are 3 final drafts that I received. So I already have quite a few that are turned in. That's fine. You do not have to wait until Friday. You just have until Friday to get it all done. So here's the piece, Grow Through Writing, and this is a final draft now of that project. And you can see there's still some yellow highlights here that I brought up. And I said, you have a nice addition here. And he says, due to the fact that writing does not interest me, I have only ever done what I had to, and for that reason. So I'm only as prepared as the bare minimum high school work in this course. And I said, okay, that's good. A good thing to add in. But do notice that the student didn't correct every issue. And why did he not do that? There are 2 broad possibilities with a lot of nuance in between, but I suggest either here perhaps that student didn't agree with my assessment of his work, or more likely he didn't understand why I had suggested changes that I did. That is something that I've hoped to be more precise with in regard to your drafts of your papers. So if you thought, geez, you know, Mr. Fowler makes these really long commentary notes sometimes and even has examples, that was just me trying to explain that oftentimes my commentary, my suggested changes aren't necessarily arbitrary. I've switched to a format where if it's in yellow, it would be a suggested change, where if it's in green, I really think you need to make that change in order for it to be assessed with the best possible grade. Here, for example, they chose not to include this comma, but here we also have while, which is a time-based preposition. Remember that prepositions are words that indicate position in both time and space. So every time you use while, you're creating, first of all, a dependent clause, and you're creating a long, it's actually a series of phrases here. While I may not feel the need, and then 2, that's not a phrase, or excuse me, that's not a preposition, but it's an infinitive phrase to go over all these topics. See, you cannot put a period there, so it's a dependent clause. So it needs a linkage to help stand up next to this complete sentence or independent clause. It will help. Subject, verb, it will help. So we need these. This is the anchor of the entire sentence right here. Okay. So that needs to be anchored with a comma. And then here we had another comma splice. We're anchoring two sentences together. My interest in writing. Interest is limited. Okay, sentence. I see, another sentence, but we're bracketing them together in a complex sentence with the semicolon, the phrase, the word however, the transitional word, and then a comma that goes after that. And then I said here, oops, you missed this period again, right? So Mr. Fowler does spend quite a bit of time to go through the process of correcting your papers. And if you make a minor mistake or a typo, that's what a draft is for. So at this point, this student has had my commentary. They've had the commentary from a fellow peer reviewer, and in their final draft, they still did not attend to a common and easily correctable mistake. Now, why would you not do that? That's an issue where Mr. Fowler starts to get a little miffed. And also more than miffed or out of sorts, I'm curious. Why not take advantage of these opportunities to increase your overall score? Now, I understand, and I would grant you that some of you did very well on your initial draft. That's wonderful. But you won't always have the opportunity to have an instructor read your paper. You do in this class. So I think it's really important that you take advantage of that opportunity when it's presented. Oops, and I say again, there's a run-on here. Okay, now this student may have corrected this or may have added to their final draft, and sometimes, unfortunately, this happens as well. Sometimes you make a new sentence or you add something that you think is a correction, and it's actually a new mistake that you create. So here again, my goal is subject verb, a simple one. That's a complete sentence. So you can't just use a comma here. You have to use a semicolon. You have to use a comma and coordinating conjunction, like and, or you could use even a subordinating conjunction like because, or you just put a period at the end and use the start of a new sentence. A comma alone, though, creates a comma splice, which is a specific type of run-on that makes for an error. Okay. And of course, as always on the final drafts, as on the previous rough draft, I will have a quick discussion with you. Notice that I try to keep it to about 30 words. This one's a little long in the tooth, so to speak, but this is 55 words. I know that doesn't look like a whole lot, but I even try to keep yours down to a lower amount of feedback because I think that students tend to read and more feedback if it's shorter and more concise. So notice that I said, after review, I feel you created an efficient evaluation of strengths and weaknesses in your style, but I did note issues pointed out earlier as extant errors, pre-existing errors in the draft. So if you still have questions about those things, you should make sure that you contact me. But overall, you identify your identify your challenges and introduce strategy to effectively address deficits for your readers. Their content was still fine. Their length was appropriate. The thesis statement was there. It was quality. The layout in terms of the assignment parameters was clear. The sentence structure and variety, it was pretty good. I didn't see a lot of the same sort of basic sentences repeated one after another. But when it comes to grammar, there were a few issues. There were two pretty severe grammar issues. A run-on and a missed period and this other run-on here. So he had a couple of run-ons that needed to be fixed. No spelling errors. Mechanics, that's like everything else related to the writing process. It's not format or grammar, and I didn't really see any issues there. So the ultimate score, a 23 out of 25, which is results in a 92. Not bad, but again, it could have been 100. So keep that in mind when you're moving through the revision process this week. All right. Next up, we're going to take a look at this week's reading, and then we'll end with Greengard's Social Games Virtual Goods. How do you like the Ready Player One homage to the Lost Boys? I thought that was pretty cool. So this week, you're responsible for reading chapters 9 to 11. If you haven't read chapters 9 to 11, you may want to pause the video here and spend some time doing that so that this isn't spoilers for you. So first of all, we're going to get our first lengthy discussion with Artemis. Now, she was referenced earlier in the book, but this is the first time Wade actually gets to meet her in the Oasis and actually have a discussion with her. So this is level 1, chapter 9, Enter Artemis. And I like this version of her because that is a little bit more to the, or more I guess truthful, or that's what am I trying to say? More faithful to the version of Artemis that's described in the book, as opposed to the sort of version that we get in the film adaptation. And of course, Artemis carries a lot of gravitas in terms of her namesake, right? Because Artemis, of course, is one of the fabled Greek goddesses of the pantheon, and actually still comes down to us today as in the form of Wonder Woman, right? Believe it or not, these are supposed to be the same character. And she's described here, again, I got another visual, more in tune with the novel version, which is described here on page 87 of your text, being that she had raven hair, styled Joan of Arc short, and appeared to be in her late teens or early 20s. She wore a suit of scaled gunmetal blue armor that looked more sci-fi than fantasy, and she had twin blaster pistols that were slung low on her hips in quick draw holsters, and there was a long curved elvish sword and a scabbard across her back. A mid-80s post-apocalyptic cyberpunk girl next door look, as Wade describes it. And I really would like some feedback about this. So as you're working on your revision this week, kick this idea around. Which version do you prefer? I think the film adaptation was pretty cool, but she still looks like a pufferfish to me. I don't know why they went with exactly this particular look. I think it was a little bit less geek-inspired than the version that we could have gotten, but to me, this would have been so much more in tune with the style of her character. Again, there's no right or wrong answer here. I'm just curious about what you all think about that. So Wade finds out later that it would have been really bad if Artemis had wiped him out, which she probably could have been, or could have done when they first met, because he said that when you had a key, he had earned, of course, the copper key by playing against the Lich King in a game of Joust. And he said that I wouldn't learn until later that the keys were non-transferable. You couldn't drop one of them or give them to another avatar. And if you were killed while you were holding a key, it vanished along with your avatar's body. So if you're curious as to why Artemis simply couldn't take the key from him, it would have done her no good to have killed him. Again, Artemis, way more powerful at this point in the game than Wade. A level 52 But still, compared to Wade's level 10. But still, she'd been trying to get the key for about 3 weeks. And then she and Wade exchange pleasantries. She notes that Parzival, of course, is the knight who quested for the Holy Grail. And of course, he says, yeah, and Artemis was the Greek goddess of the hunt. We find out that she was actually the first to discover the Tomb of Horrors and go against the Archlich. But she had been trying to beat him for about 5 weeks without any success. And then Wade, of course, waltzes in, so to speak, and defeats him using a little trick. The two of them exchange contact cards, which includes various information about the two avatars. And of course, we get a lot of sort of interplay with the idea of heroes, and in this case, with the introduction of Artemis, Greek goddesses, and the mythos of these characters, right? Artemis in the Greek religion was the goddess of wild animals, the goddess of the hunt, vegetation, chastity, and childbirth. So there's a really important reason, if you're thinking about the Wonder Woman movies as of late, why Wonder Woman pauses in the first film and kind of fawns over new babies, or like a baby in a carriage, because she's not just a, I think we all think babies are cute and adorable and all that sort of thing, but she has a special affinity for children. And I thought that was really cool that they brought that out in the film. But in terms of her aliases, for the Romans, she was identified as Diana, which is why Wonder Woman has that name, Diana Prince, or Diana, the goddess of the hunt, so to speak. Artemis in the original Greek pantheon was the daughter of Zeus and Leto, and was the twin sister of Apollo, and was a favorite goddess among those who lived in the more rural areas of ancient Greece and Rome. And so as they're waiting for the force field to wear off, because right away Artemis wants to know who he is, so she sets a force field so he can't escape, and she kind of grills him about the Archlich. And since she is waiting to go against him and Wade beat him, he doesn't reset for 5 hours, so they're stuck there killing time. And eventually the conversation turns to the contest, and she asks Parzival, what would you do if you won the contest? And his plans are a little bit less than benign. He says the usual, I guess. First of all, I'd move into a mansion and buy a bunch of cool things and not be poor, essentially. And then he has a plan to purchase a nuclear-powered interstellar spacecraft constructed in Earth's orbit, which he would stock with a lifetime supply of food and water, a self-sustaining biosphere, and a supercomputer loaded with all of these things that are available on the Oasis, every book, movie, song, video game, and so on and so forth. And then he would leave the solar system and look for an extrasolar Earth-like planet. Artemis' plans are a little bit more down to earth, so to speak. Pun very much intended there. She said, well, first of all, I'd make sure everyone on the planet had enough to eat, and then I'd start throwing the money at the big problems like world hunger, the energy crisis, and maybe trying to do something to fix the environment. This is interesting because this little conversation has a lot of parallels with another myth called the Fisher King, which is tied deeply into the arc of discovery with Parzival and the Holy Grail. At one point, Parzival meets a character called the Fisher King, also known as the Wounded King or the Main King, who's the last and long bloodline of knights charged with keeping the Holy Grail sacred and secret. Versions of the original story vary, but all he is able to do is fish in a very small boat on the river near his castle, Corbinik, and wait for some noble person who might be able to heal him by simply asking a certain question. And that question, of course, is that the Holy Grail? In later versions, knights travel from many lands to heal the Fisher King, but only the chosen can accomplish this feat. The chosen, of course, is Parzival or Percival, and initially he's alone when he is able to do this in the other stories. But as the stories and myths stuck around and continued, he's joined by knights, Galahad and Bors, and which is very interesting because if you know anything about where this book is going, we met H earlier, and now we've officially met Artemis. So in some ways, they're kind of filling the roles of Galahad and Bors by completing the sort of trifecta that's necessary for success. It will get a little bit more expansive as the novel unfolds, but that's all I'm going to say at this time. And I've just included these two really interesting images, the kind of side-scrolling story told here in this ancient tapestry, which happens to, strangely, sort of mimic or predict the kind of side-scrolling adventure video games of the latter 20th century. Isn't that an interesting set of images? A little food for thought there. Wade helps Artemis out because, of course, he's got a huge crush on her, and she seems like a genuinely cool person. He says, hey, Artemis, try playing the game on the left side, just as this fellow is here. And he says, that's how I won. I think he might be easier to beat if he's playing as the stork. So he gives her a piece of advice. But why? Why does he help her? Interesting. All right. Now, Wade takes the key and ventures to Middleton, Ohio, in level 1, chapter 10. And as you can see here, Halliday had created Middleton, but he hadn't just placed a single recreation of his hometown, from Ohio there. He made 256 identical copies of that hometown, spread out evenly across an entire planet's surface. He used old street maps, phone books, photographs, and vintage footage for reference to make sure everything was authentic and accurate as possible. And this isn't just a random clip. This is actually a picture of Middleton, Ohio. So if you had a mind's eye version of it, you can still keep that intact. Just notice that there must be a street like this somewhere in that version. The place reminded me a lot of the town in the movie Footloose, which is why I have that reference photo over here on the left-hand side. Small, rural, sparsely populated. Now on page 103, he actually ventures into finds and ventures inside of Halliday's house. So Parzival was the first to find a copper key, so he earned 10,000 points, which means he is ready to try the next part of the process, which is to challenge an old-style video game called the Dungeons of Daggerath. Now, text adventure games, sometimes called interactive fiction, were a new type of video game that sort of followed on the heels of the success of Dungeons and Dragons board games. And one of the unique things that happens in this book is that Klein sort of traces the linkage of game development throughout time. Board games typically include things like a board, a map, avatars or pieces, and they're multiplayer. So Monopoly, Sorry, Life, Trivial Pursuit. I'm trying to think of all the big ones here. Even Candyland. They all have these various elements there. So even if you're not like into Dungeons and Dragons, by the way, I'm not either. I don't know that much about them except for what my students have reported back to me. You know what a basic board game is. Now, Dungeons and Dragons campaigns were a little bit more complex. They included, again, maps and avatars, and they were multiplayer. But they also included creativity and visual guides to help propel the fantasy of the game forward. Text adventure are Dungeons and Dragons based or fantasy based games rendered with what you see here: simple computer graphics and a very limited menu of moves and actions. So not quite a full-fledged video game. And Wade describes it on page 106. You could do things like type in commands for turn left or get torch to navigate your way through a maze of vector graphic corridors, while fighting off spiders, stone giants, blobs, and wraiths as you descend deeper and deeper, working your way down to the dungeon's 5 increasingly difficult levels. And of course, he's victorious, and he realizes that when he hears the hero tracks for Conan the Barbarian and then again Lady Hawk played through the vintage boombox. He says he finally defeats the evil Wizard of Daggeroth, and he uses an Elvis sword and a ring of ice to do that. And it says here, the text read below that, "Behold, destiny awaits the hand of a new wizard." Then he hears a dot matrix printer sort of grind to life, and a message appears in the recreation of Halliday's hometown bedroom, his bedroom, and it says, "Congratulations, you've opened the first gate." And he says, "I glanced around and saw that there was now a wrought iron gate embedded in the bedroom wall, in the exact spot where the War Games poster had been a second before. And in the center of the gate was a copper-plated lock with a keyhole." So in level 1, chapter 11, we go through the gate and complete the first challenge, right? So each of these stages has 3 parts. You do something to win the key. Then you decode the mystery on the key inscription and face the challenge to unlock the gate to the final challenge. There are 3 challenges for each key. Wade finds himself in the film adaptation of War Games. And he says that, "I climbed on top of Halliday's desk so I could reach the lock and slid the copper key into the keyhole, turning it. The entire gate began to glow as if the metal had become superheated, and its double doors swung inward, revealing a field full of stars. It appeared to be a portal into deep space. My God, it's full of stars," I heard a disembodied voice say, which is from the image here of 2001: A Space Odyssey. I leaned forward and looked through the portal left and right, up and down, but nothing but an endless field of stars in all directions. Squinting, I could also make out a few tiny nebula and galaxies in the distance. But he didn't hesitate, and he jumps in. He emerges in an arcade in the 1980s, which were quite the phenomenon before the video game collapse of the 1980s. He sees some classic games like Dig Dug and Zaxxon, and he's playing Space Invaders in the middle of it. And then he realizes that he's seen this entire setup before. It is literally the film War Games. And he's playing as the character David Lightman. And this was the first scene in the film. So this is a new type of game called a flick sync. And what he has to do is, like an actor who has only rehearsed but never actually performed, he has to talk his way through the entire movie. He has to memorize these passages and say them at the appropriate times, make the same moves that the characters in the film made in order for the game to be completed and for him to win the challenge. He can't cheat, though. Memorization counts a lot in these kinds of flick sync games. It seems that cheating would give him, or would cheat him out of missing the point of the entire thing. Now, incidentally, the reality of the need to buy the rights to a film adaptation like War Games was why in the film adaptation we only get one flick sync, and that, of course, is from The Shining in the film version. They probably couldn't get the rights to immersive interactive games like, films like War Games to create a simulated interactive and immersive game. So that's all for this particular set of readings. I hope that this was interesting or compelling for you. Which leads us to the last bit of material for today. This article that I had you read, Social Games, Virtual Goods by Samuel Greengard. So I'm going to make sure that this is available to you. But essentially, it's a short read, okay? It says it's 4 pages, but literally it's, this page, which isn't even a full page, and then this column here, and then you don't have to read in memorandum. It jumps over to the rest of page 3 and ends there, and then there's a copyright page. So it's really only 3 pages. And it's pretty interesting because this article, it's about 10 years old now. So I'm going to have to find a better article for this in the future, but essentially Greengard's point is not lost. It's just that one of the most interesting things about games like, as he mentions here, Farmville, Mafia Wars, World of Warcraft, Second Life, is that they're often accompanied by the purchase and sale of virtual goods using virtual currencies. And he says that the idea of purchasing virtual goods with real world money or with virtual funds has created an entirely new thought process about how money and currency works in this digital realm. And we get into situations where this multi-billion-dollar trend, according to market research firm Instat, the demand for virtual goods hit 7.3 billion in 2010, which was up from 2.1 billion just 3 years earlier. Moreover, Instat predicts that the figure will reach about 14 billion by 2014. Another consulting firm, Magdid and Associates, reports that the percentage of web users trading virtual goods will grow from about 13% to 21% throughout the year of 2011. And now, here we are in 2021 in a world where we're purchasing lots of real goods using virtual means, but the idea of the growth of virtual goods and real world monetary exchange rates being a part of that is more prevalent than ever before. It's commonplace, and in some ways we can look back at an article like this and actually just sort of shrug. But this is a very interesting article to think about, especially if you're interested in pursuing this topic later in the semester as a paper topic that you could use as the basis for an argumentative essay. Okay. I'm not going to read the whole article for you. Some people may find this more interesting than others, but that's something that I just wanted to make you aware of. Now, we've reached the end of everything that I wanted to talk to you about today. So for this week, your number one priority is to complete your draft. You can do that, your self-assessment draft. And then let me rephrase that. Hold on. The number one priority is complete your self-assessment final draft so that you can have that ready to go for Friday. Now, you don't have to wait until Friday. You can start working on it and turn it in as soon as you're ready, but you have the entire week to focus on that. Priority number 2, read the rest of what we went over today, chapter 9, 10, 11 in the text, Ready Player One. And then you can begin exploring the next project, which is the review. Okay. And you can think of the review as an analysis as well. So it might carry both of those names. I think I refer to it as the review project, but that's fine. Okay, that's it for me for this week. If you have additional questions or concerns, as always, reach out to me. You do not have a discussion panel this week. So no threaded discussion. I want you to focus on the process of completing your drafts. In retrospect, I think last week would have been the better week to not have had a threaded discussion. I might have to modify that for going forward this semester, but I'll keep that in mind. Okay, that's it for me. Until next time, continue to read, continue to think critically, and try to make the best decisions that you can. This is Mr. Fowler signing off until next week. Take care.